Hello again, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Radical Insights to Make Something Meaningful Happen, a conversation with Thom Kennon. A few logistical notes before we get started. You'll see two different ways to communicate with us throughout the whole presentation. There's a chat box and a Q&A box. If you could use the chat box for all technical issues and the Q&A box for any questions related to the content of the webinar, that would be great. With that, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Zoe Dowling is our SVP of Research here at Focus Vision. She's an eclectic blend of researcher, technologist, sociologist, and marketer, and she uses her extensive research expertise to help clients best apply Focus Vision's technological solutions. We also have our guest for today, Thom Kennon, leading global marketing strategist and founder of alternative consultancy Free Radicals. Thom is also an adjunct professor at New York University and Yeshiva University in their digital and integrated marketing master's programs. At this time, our panelists are going to dive right into the presentation. Zoe, would you like to get started?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rachel. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, from wherever you're joining from. Very glad that you're going to spend this next time with us. I'm exceptionally excited for this conversation. We're going to be getting Thom to introduce himself a little bit more shortly, but I did want to say that, you know, when we wrote the synopsis for this discussion, the world was very different. You know, and you can see that we're talking about marketing strategy in today's world of change and how to really, you know, dig in and develop and gather fresh insights, and also how to translate that into business growth. And because our world has been changing so rapidly to date. Now, of course, in the last couple of weeks, everything has changed almost beyond belief. So I think it's going to be a particularly relevant conversation. How I'm going to frame that and kind of deal with this kind of shift is both for us to have this conversation to talk about the world of change that was prior to a couple of weeks ago, and then just kind of tentatively dive into, well, what's going on and how do you think we're going to come out the other side? I mean, nobody knows, but we do think that we can't ignore it. It'd be foolish to do so, and I think we're all wondering. And so we're looking forward to this conversation between Thom and myself. This is very much an open forum. I've got the Q&A box right there in front of me. I'm going to be looking at this as we go out. So as we're talking about things, if you've got a question, please put it in, and I will try to, you know, just weave questions in, and we'll have a few moments at the end for some additional Q&A. So very much looking for, this is a discussion, not just between myself and Thom, but also with yourself. So with that, Thom, thank you so much for joining today.
My complete pleasure, Zoe.
So I think what I wanted to do, and I said to you about, you know, as a way to kick off the conversation and for everybody to kind of understand, you know, where you're from and where your perspectives are. I was also going to say, when somebody has the title, I was looking of post-advertising chief radicalist at Free Radicals, which is I love it, which is your consultancy that you founded. I think it'd be great to hear about, you know, where did you start? How did you evolve and get to the point where you are with all of these wonderful ideas? And I mean, did you start out in marketing strategies? Is that where it began? So.
Yeah, I've led a modeled course to this morning or this evening's or this afternoon's session here today. I started out, and I've been a strategy guy from the beginning. I started out in the database direct late 80s, and I started out doing strategy in the world of persuasion and fundraising and membership management for large nonprofits. So I had an agency outside of DC called Craver Matthew Smith, and I had a chance to cut my teeth on understanding how you touch deeply into people's, you know, emotional and social content in order to get them to respond in a certain way. I saw in the and early 90s, I started my own agency to do sort of segmentation analysis and data strategy and insights development for smaller nonprofits, and then went into commercial, and in the mid 90s started a digital agency, and that's where I began to sort of work my chops out when it came down to, you know, human experience. So I'm a strategy guy, but I'm not trained as a traditional sort of brand strategy guy up here. I've been obsessively down in the channel and down in where human experience lives throughout my whole career. Spent some time working for a lot of the large holding companies. If anybody knows the way that the large advertising networks are knit together. I worked for WPP for a couple of years on and off, for Omnicom for a couple of years on and off, as a strategy guy, global strategy on large brands. And I did advertising, I did social, I did search, I did digital. I've always been the mildly color outside the lines guy. I'm a really bad employee, I think, or at least I'm tough on bosses because of my need, my urge to constantly say, why? So I've made a career, my modest career out of asking why.
Well, I mean, I think there's many on the line here that will agree that we think that's a mighty fine career to have, because it is perhaps one of the most important questions that we can have. You know, why? What's going on? Not just take things at face value. One of the things I wanted to pick up on, and you said you started very early on sort of really how to get people to respond on an emotional and social sort of area. And I mean, that seems to me that you know, in the past 10 years, for example, maybe even 20 years, you know, for all the work that Kennon's done and that, you know, emotions and understanding how people think really has come to the fore. But you kind of came there earlier by the sounds of it, and thinking about the importance of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I became obsessed with, and I guess I would have to imagine most of the researchers and strategists and planner type people that might be on this Zoomcast share this passion for people, for human nature. And so I became convinced that the job of, first of all, I believe that over the years, and this is from my experience across all channels, all categories, all markets, and in all sort of disciplines within the sort of marketing stack, I've become convinced that marketing's job is very, very, very simple. And it is to transform human insight into business value, right? And the big question is, what goes in the middle of that? How do you do that? And what happens? And so I believe, to your question about people and about social and emotional content of humans, that I think is the stuff of eventually articulated insight. I think that human nature, I don't think if you look at us right now, all of us, I think everybody on this call is spending a vast amount of our time on Facebook or on WeChat or on WhatsApp or on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, trying to stay connected. And we live and I'm not quite sure how this pandemic would have played out or would play out without that ability for us to remain almost obsessively connected to each other at some level throughout our day. I believe that human nature has not, at its essential level, has not changed radically in 60, 70,000 years since we gathered around fires for food or for heat or for company or to make sure that the animals wouldn't eat us. And so I do believe that human nature, deep, deep down in the limbic system, where social and emotional content lives, is essential and deep. What has changed, I think, is obviously culture. So I have, if insight to value is the job of all marketing, I believe that there's a framework for doing that. And I think it is essentially about, like the people on this call spend their careers doing, going out and scouring the world for insight about human nature. And I believe that has to happen. And then we write briefs. I'm a strategy guy. Okay. The whole reason I think insight's important, fresher, deeper insight, is because it goes in the brief, it goes in the plan, it goes in the strategy. Yeah. And I think that culture is what changes nonstop. Go back and look at advertising from the 70s and you'll see what we mean, right? But what doesn't change necessarily is human nature. So I believe that more and more and more, and especially in a time like this with COVID-19 and whatever is going to be on the other side, I think we're going to be at a reset moment. But I think we've been moving towards that reset moment for a while. The job on people that are on this Zoomcast right now is going to be more important than ever, which is to go out and find fresh and deep insight. The kind of insight, if you were to show, and I do this all the time, I get an insight. I go, this is good, this is fresh, this is deep, this is troubling. And the test for me, if it's right or close, is I show it or I share it with the person for whom it's about. What do you think their response is? They deny it. They deny it because it's too deep, it's too real, it's too close. So that to me is a test.
That's it. There's so many things that you've kind of opened up where that I think that we want to dig into there. I mean, I personally agree so much. I mean, when we talk about emotions, these are the fundamental, we've got the 8 basic emotions, and it depends who you're looking to, who you subscribe to, but those haven't changed, and those won't change. That is us as human beings. That's you can take that as this is a given. But you're right, culture changes. Culture is something I'm incredibly passionate about, because I think it's changing daily, as you can see even right now. But just the pace of change, and I mean, this is cliche to say, but I think it's still worth saying, is that we're in this vastly accelerated changing culture because of the connectivity of the world that we're in now, and that connectivity, I think, is a double-edged sword. In some ways, it's been incredibly, and it is incredibly beneficial and helpful for us, because we were missing connectivity with others. We were missing that human, we were getting more and more isolated in our worlds. Now we're able to reach out. On the other hand, it's facilitating and perhaps driving a different type of isolation and a different type of disconnect.
Well, yes, and what you've said there is really, really critical, because I think that if in this context of going out and finding insight about human nature in the context of culture, I think 2 things. I think one is that's an essentially anthropological exercise. Okay, so we call ourselves researchers, but I think we're strategists. I think it is a study of humans in the context of culture is what we're doing. And so I believe that the methods and processes for getting at data, all right, the data from which the intelligence that we get from research is increasingly more productive, deeper, more fresh when we use anthropological methodologies like ethnographies, like deep listening, like ride-alongs, like immersive and observational research techniques, because of its essential anthropological aspect. Because we're in the context of culture, we have to understand human, and desire and need and want are where the stuff of that emotional and that social content that we got to go down deep inside and then articulate an insight about it.
Yeah. I'm just looking at one of the comments coming in, and it's more a comment, and I agree with it so thoroughly. It would be nice to know how to analyze customer emotions in the B2B fintech market and incorporate them into marketing strategy in an effective manner. I mean, I think just one thing I'll say before you dive in, Thom, is we in a B2B sense, we forget we're people to people. It doesn't matter that it's business to business. It's still people within that are doing the buying, that are responding to the information. And so we should really, I think, pay more attention to the emotional aspect.
Yeah, I mean, and it gets at, and I've done a fair amount, if not, a good portion of my marketing in an extraordinarily long career, very old, has been in the B2B sector across multiple categories, and financial services, financial technology being one of them. And I will tell you that, 6 or 7 years ago, we began saying, just like you just said there, that, people are people. But still the channels and the cadence and the rhythm and the sequence and sometimes and often the context for our communications in the B2B world were different. But I think what we've learned over the last 4, 5, 6 years is our people are people, and regardless of how we reach them, the contents of the message, the contents of the value, because if we're in the insight, turning human insight into business value, okay, business, then what we have to do is we have to appeal to some discreetly named need inside that business person. And I got to tell you, I mean, I've been in business for 30 plus years, and I know that the way I make decisions is just like I make them anywhere else, because it's about, I want to belong, I want to succeed, I don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah.
I want to be wealthy, I want to get promoted.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose my job, I want to look good.
Yeah.
All of those things are the same reason. That's how we buy refrigerators and choose jeans. So I think in the B2B world, to our questioners posit, I think more and more, the ability to get fresh insight about the business buyer is almost more critical than it's ever been, especially right now when all buyers are sitting in their living room with nice shirts and their sweatpants on Zoom around the planet.
Yeah, no, it's a different, and that's a good segue into saying, let's talk about the world of change. And we've touched on some of this, but let's really dive into the world of change up until a few weeks ago. What disruptors were shaking things up? When do you think this started? And, is there a pivot moment that you can identify, or do you think this has been a gradual shift?
Well, it's interesting, and you and I have spoken in the past about, the world of brands and the world of business and the world of advertising or marketing changed radically on the other side, like everything else, on the other side of the great recession of 2008-9 globally, in all markets really. And so, and the way that changed, at least for a short period of time, was, as you and I have discussed, brands were almost forced to get more real. And everyone was starting from this similar state of sort of culture and business shock and social shock and economic shock. And so for a short period of time, there was a very interesting moment where some brands were doing some very interesting things. You saw brands, like Red Bull launching the Red Bull Music Academy. Instead of investing, 20 years worth of advertising or 8 years worth of advertising, they just sunsetted it, sadly. They invested in a platform for the types of people they know drink Red Bull: musicians, recording artists, DJs. That was a different kind of way of behaving in the market instead of just advertising. So we saw that period of time. What has happened in that period of time from 2010, 11 to today is the ascendancy and now the hegemony of the platforms. And when I say the platforms, I'm speaking very as a general state of disintermediation that has been affected in monetizing our attention by Amazon and by Google and by Facebook and by Alibaba and by Tencent and Baidu, and all of those layers that have given us services and connectivity. All we have to do is give up all our data, our emotional and our social and our behavioral and our transactional data. And so to me, that is what has prevented many brands and businesses from making different decisions about where to invest their marketing. And so because it's meant that people stopped watching television or stopped reading, lots of magazines and stopped listening to the radio. So they said, let's go online. And they took all those budgets. And I've been there. I've been in the room when they decided to shift. And I said, how about you give us 5% for a little different kind of marketing, a little more insightfully organic, human behavioral marketing instead of just advertising. But it was easy to shift all that money there. And Facebook and Google and Alibaba were very, very welcome to take it. So that's where we are right now. And I think, and as you pointed out, that in the last year or two with GDPR and CCA and Congress, grilling, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, their time is that clock is ticking on the platform's hegemony. And I think this moment in time is going to accelerate that in a very positive way for people like the brands, hopefully, that are on this call today.
I think for sure. I mean, it's all happened so quickly. Again, it's when you pause and you think, Facebook, 2004. I remember seeing the New York Times article saying, "Do you want people to know where you are?" Like, and the way that it was framed then, and it turns out we all did. But for a minute, that's a moment. As the groundswell all came into play, and as we found new ways of connectivity, we found new ways of crossing time zones and geographies and seas and just interacting. And so there was that excitement. And on the other hand, just going back to that Zuckerberg, being talking to Congress and at that time, hearing, I don't know, I think I was just listening to either something on the news or on the radio, and there was a woman saying, I remember it was a BBC World Service question time or your opinion, and it was this woman, and she was indignant. She's like, I didn't agree to Facebook having my data. Like, I didn't agree to that. And I'm thinking, well, what did you think you're getting for free? And it's a problem.
Yeah, well, you get what you pay for. And when you don't pay anything, at least from a monetary standpoint, you should question very deeply what's exactly going on. Yeah, it's, who could imagine at the very moment in time when people were shifting towards these social and connectivity environments, that the people who built them and enabled them and gave them to us for free would turn them against us when it came down to shattering any attempts at human autonomy or privacy or sense of community. So it's a very, 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 very interesting moment in time.
Sure.
And we were going to get there anyway, but I think on the other side of this, all bets are off. And I think in a very positive way for the creative and strategic thinkers when it comes to how do brands now behave in the world instead of just advertise in the world. Yeah.
I mean, I think that summed up a lot. For one, I just wanted to bring the quote because we put it in the synopsis: a world brutally mediated by platforms and ephemeral tension. And I think that does sum up so well kind of where we are now, that all of these platforms and you know, we talked before, it's not just the social platforms. It's, I mean, Google's an advertising platform. Amazon's rapidly turning into that as well. I mean, Amazon's business is multifaceted, but you know, the way that information and is presented to us now is just this kind of bite size, and we do move from one thing to the other. And so, you know, that kind of comes back to that cultural shift and changing on how we are acting and behaving together with all of these business elements to it as well.
Yeah, and I think because of that, and so one of the my theories about, you know, the new marketing, okay, is that if we arm ourselves with a deeper, fresher, you know, more troubling and intention-filled insight, then we create a very interesting competitive advantage for our businesses. Because if we brief with that, if we plan with that, if we develop strategies for that, and strategy, I'm talking about a unified planning model. I'm talking about where those fresh insights inform everything from business strategy to product strategy, technology strategy to content strategy to brand strategy. And what I think it drives, it's not just to drive a different kind of brief and different kind of plans, it drives a different manifestation of value in the world. And in a world where advertising, you know, we're rushing past things, or we're ad blocking, or we're TiVoing, and we're going, advertising is the thing we overtly you're trying to avoid. In a world where meaning can break through, where meaning and potential value, you know, at heart, part of my philosophy is grounded in a very Marxist understanding of how value is created by whom, where, and what happens next. And I think the job for us is this kind of marketing, and we need different insights to do that. So we're in the value creation business. And in fact, I tell, after this big speech at my competitive strategy class at the beginning of the semester, I'll always say, you know, I guess you think that we're in the insights business. You think we're in the data business. You think we're in the marketing. No, we're in the make people do this business. And truly, and this gets back to my early start in direct, is that the outcome of whatever we do as brands and businesses in the marketplace, whether it's in the store aisle, whether it's on Facebook, whether it is on television or in cinema or on print ad, the outcome is to get people's attention because you've got something, A, that is for them. That's the job of the insight, because it appeals to some deep, you know, almost unadmittable desire or need or want or gap. And B, it has potential value for them. And that moment of value exchange, or creation, I should say, for the human, is what leads to an exchange that eventually turns into, hopefully, if you do it right, business value. So that's why insight to business value, to me, remains a pretty straightforward logic.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think this is a good segue. I'm seeing a couple of questions talking about culture and insights. One thing there's a comment that come in, I really think it's worth bringing up. It's heard this once years ago: if you're not paying for a product, you are the product. And I think that sums up incredibly well exactly where we are with these platforms. Yeah,
and we've never ever even imagined what that's like. And when people started saying that 4 or 5, 6 years ago, you know, I was grateful, because at least people weren't going around saying content is king, you know. So it became the new marketing meme, but it remains as true as ever. And as startling and as pithy and as odd as it sounds, there's an immense amount of potential catastrophe in that, because it abnegates, I think, human autonomy. It abnegates our control. It abnegates our privacy. It abnegates identity. And that's the thing we've given up. And so that's the thing that smart businesses and brands, I think, can claim back for people.
That's great. So let's move into this talking about, I mean, we've talked a lot about culture. You and I both feel that this is incredibly important. So, and we're talking about insight. So if I'm, you know, one of the questions is, if fresh insight is really about seeing culture fresh, where do you read, watch, explore to keep your finger on the pulse of culture?
It's a great question. I had a question last night, and I teach a marketing research, applied marketing research course here at the Yeshiva University Master's Program. And one of my students said, he said, well, why do I need a fresh insight? If I got an insight that's working, why do I just told them the same story that I've told myself and my clients, my prospects and my colleagues, and for the last 4 or 5 years? I have numerous times applied alternative, let's call them alternative research methodologies, ethnographic, mobile and video ethnographic, deep listening using social media and analysis, as ways at getting at fresh insight. And I have taken briefs, and I could name brands right now that everyone in this world buys or knows very, very well. And we have gotten challenge briefs from 3 or 4 major, Fortune 500 global brands, and they gave us a segmentation, they gave us an audience, they gave us the insight. We said, okay, and 3, 4, 5, 6 times in the last several years, I've applied these different kinds of research, more human or anthropologically fueled research methodologies, and I've been trying to get decent at seeing something other people don't in that data, in that analysis of the content we glean from deep listening, or from anthropology, or from ethnography, or from video eth. And in each of those cases, I've come in the room and I've shown the client or the brand manager or the product manager or the VP of marketing an insight that they didn't have. And they said, where did you get that? I said, I'll show you, but 1 second. Let me show you the creative you get. Let me show you the strategy you get. Let me show you the plan you get when you brief with that deeper, fresher insight. And they buy. They buy because someone took the time to say, do we need to update our insights? I asked that same student last night. I said, I came from direct, right? And in direct, I don't know if there's any direct researchers in the world on the phone, on the Zoom, but in direct, you're constantly trying to beat your control, as we say. Okay, there's always a test and the control, and essentially the test is informed with the definite insight. So it creates the culture, and people talk about being curious, and curious, that's table stakes. This is about imagination. And it's about seeing something that everyone else missed in the data, in the content of your research. And so in all those different cases, I say, if you learn, teach yourself how to see things that other people don't, deep down. And you're constantly trying to challenge your insights that fed that control, because everything's fine. You're in good hands with Allstate. It's a 40-year-old brand campaign. Why mess with that? I guarantee you, there's somebody trying every single day to beat that with an insight.
So if I'm playing back, because I know people are going to be wanting to get quite tangible on, okay, how is it that what are you doing to get that? What are you looking for? And what I'm hearing from you is a couple of things. One, it goes back to where we started, asking why. I guess it's being curious. It's really keeping your mind open to what's going on around you. And I feel as if, we've had within the research world sort of these I think naming of like being a quantitative researcher, being a qualitative researcher, and they don't typically mix, and we you typically specialize in one or the other, and so on. And if you're a quantitative person, you're going to want to go in and design your survey and question to us this. Whereas I think what you're, and vice versa, if you're the quali, the touchy-feely, then you'll go and do your bit. And I think that what you're saying is that there's kind of, as that person, it's about you kind of utilizing all of those aspects, and it's keeping your mind open for those, what's going on around me.
Yeah, I mean, and this is probably one of the most important, areas for us to probe, actually, for the audience that we have here on our Zoomcast. I came up in a world where most of the people were using quant. Okay, I came up in a direct world, a data-driven world. Quant was scalable. Quant was, was analytical. When I shifted, I started working for Y&R and their network for a couple of years, and moved into the advertising world, and there was much more qual going on. But still traditional quant on one side and traditional qual on the other. So it was focus group, stakeholder interviews, things like that. What I have recognized in the last 8, 9, 10, 12 years, and it started in the mid-aughts when I was at iCrossing, and a woman named Lisa Bonifacio, who came from Interbrand, joined, I was head of strategy, she was the head of research at iCrossing on Madison Avenue for a short period of time. And she decided, let's take a look at search behavior. This is 2005. This is before the ascendancy of social. And she said, let's look at this 2 data points, a search phrase and the estimated monthly search volume. And let's see if there's any insight in there. And we developed an entire research methodology around analyzing massive data sets of search behavior. And that's where it struck me that there is a new kind of ethnographic manifestation of human need and desire that is there and available for us to access. And then 3 or 4 or 5 years later, and I started, I developed a global listening platform for brands like Nokia and working in the WPP network, where we were listening with 7 different tools in 15 different markets in 6 different languages. And every night we're scraping it all together and throwing it in databases on Madison Avenue, and the pointy-headed guys with the pen guards, they used to have pen guards. And we're analyzing and modeling this stuff. That's when I realized that it's not quant, it's not qual, because you would argue that that's qual, but it's about, I think, triangulating data.
Sure.
That can come, and sometimes it's important, the sequence. So many of the most recent fresh, deep insights that I've landed on I saw and articulated and briefed with and planned with and won with, have been actually started out with some nuggets we got from listening that we tested inside territories or stimulus inside of qual, and sometimes quant. And then we said, look at that, look at that. They told us resilient. This headache sufferer is not resilient. She is relentless. And we briefed with relentless. And a very, very large pharmaceutical bought it because they said, how? We didn't, that's right, it's deeper, it's more real, and it was refreshed. Now, who knows, they're gonna beat relentless someday. But we did that with a sequenced and integrated research program.
So, okay, so if I was to translate what you've said into the language that I would use, for me, that feels like, I agree with you in triangulation. It feels like bringing big data, because social listening data is big data. It requires a different way of different analytical capabilities, computer power and so on. At the same time, there's a lot of small data in there. And by small data, it's everything. And I also can't survey to small data because it's, you're asking a small set group of people, but also that qualitative element, like, what is that nugget? And I think that there's also what I think you've said here, and I certainly know you've said in our other conversations, that, sometimes it's that one nugget that brings it to life. It could be that one comment that comes through on social, but it could be that one observation or that one piece when you're doing if you're doing, say, mobile ethnography or something, that it's like, aha, that encapsulates what we're seeing broader. And that makes that maybe that brings that aha moment together.
Yes, but yes, but Zoe, because there's a cumulative buildup, and I'll give you a very good example. And this happens to me in almost every category for the last 6 or 7 years, as I'm trying to, create a rigorous process and method for doing this. But for almost all of my research reports that I'll use, deep listening and/or video ethnography, or qual, I will almost always develop an initial report of findings from listening. And that always has one section in the front. It's got these dashboards. It's got sentiment. It's got volume. It's got market. It's got influencers. It's got some sort of demographic. It's got word clouds and all that wonderful stuff. And that's a check mark for me. That just says, this looks like the ecosystem that's got some interesting stuff. But then, to your point, the real analysis, and this is where it's not just curiosity. This is where it's imagination, but this is also where it is stamina. And my students and my colleagues, they hate this part, but once they get it, they get it. And when you spend 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 hours reading, we call it listening, but it's reading. And you read these posts, and 85, 90% of it, even if you get a great extract, a great taxonomy, a great query, is irrelevant. It's garbage, it's spam. But all of a sudden, if you read and read and read and read and read, and you drill down into a subreddit, you drill down into a Facebook group, you drill down into a WhatsApp group, and all of a sudden you go, and it happens to me all the time, I go, I got it. I got these people here. I got these people here. Now I got to get them here. The way you get them here is you brief with the insight that you articulate from that kind of analysis. So it's a cumulative moment for me. It's not like, there it is. There's the quote.
Sure. And that makes absolute sense, because it's like all of these ideas being fed into, formulating your thoughts. That's certainly how my brain works. I kind of take in different pieces of information. And then at some point it kind of like, it is that moment, but it's not just one thing you've read or what you're just seeing. It's everything coming together. I am going to put to you though, we are in this so-called, and I think we've already moved out of this paradigm, but the better, faster, cheaper paradigm, which is why insights, when you and I were first talking about this discussion, I tentatively titled it, why you need the insights box and the marketing, the strategy brief. Because we were, this world where we don't have time for insights. Who has time to do 40 hours of reading on their social? I mean, like, so how have you found navigating that? How do you get the time to, you know, how do you fight for the time? How do you fight for the budget to do things like that?
Well, this is the great bane of strategy, people. I've suffered it for 30 plus years. Everybody's, I tell my students, like, this is the greatest job in all of marketing. I said, it's also the shittiest pay when it comes right down to it. But, because people don't value it. Because people think, well, we do that, or we got that, insight's fine, research, we hire someone to do that, or our agency does that, or we have a brand manager who does that. So getting it to be valued is very, very difficult. And going into, you know, so as you might imagine, you know, the one good circus trick I've seen to get mildly decent at repeating over the many years is getting at that insight. And so I will tell you this, trying to build a business around selling insight is very hard. People don't value it, but they don't see yet.
So how do we, and my thing, and I want to also lead into a question that's there that I think's linked to this, but how do we show that value? How do we get that shift in business? And the question is can you speak more about how to gather insights around culture that are actionable for business? And I want to kind of, I mean, I think that's a good question in and of itself, but I also want to take it from, you can get these insights around culture. We can say how things are shifting, but how do we translate that into something that's actionable for business? And B, and this is, I mean, equally fundamental, how do we get businesses to believe that they need that this is, you know, essential to their, to making the so-called, we'll talk about data-driven business decisions. Well, let's make data-driven business decisions. How do we bridge that?
And the answer is results, and how we get there is, I think, relatively straightforward. And I'll give you a quick example. About a year and a half ago, a very large global pharmaceutical company came to the program that I teach at, the business program I teach at NYU, and Masters of Integrated Marketing. And they gave us a brief. They said they actually sent an RFP out to Kellogg, to Wharton, and our lowly little business school, and we won because we put forth an idea about how we're going to help them that I guess, you know, Kellogg or Wharton didn't. And they said, we are coming out to market with a very, 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 very breakthrough product that treats an insidious disease, a feminine disease, and we want you to critique, analyze, and make recommendations for a plan we have been developing for the last 2 years. And it was all their research, all their trials, all their segmentation, all of their go-to-market planning, all of their media budgets, all their channel strategy, all their content strategy, their non-branded site, everything. They gave us this package, gave us 2.5 months to do our own research, analyze it, and then we ran a workshop in New York City a year ago last December for their brand team, their research team, their product team, their marketing team, and their agencies and everyone else. And we said something very simple. We said at the very beginning, something that you and I talk about a lot, that every brief is a business brief. You've given us a challenge to critique and make recommendations. And they said specifically, we want recommendations for what they called social. And so we came up with a very straightforward proposal. We said, we're going to suggest, because they gave us this big budget that they were going to spend, and none of it was on the sort of, let's call it alternative, more organic, more human-based behavioral marketing, brand behavior. And so we showed them, if you give us 6% of this very large measured media budget, we will tag and track and measure and optimize and report everything we do in this sort of alternative track. And we will put our hand over our heart, and we will promise you, as best we can, incremental lift. And we just showed them, and this is your trajectory over the next 12 months of product sales. If you do what you're going to do, we think we can drive it like that: earlier, better, faster, higher, by investing just a small percentage in a different kind of marketing. But we have to have, I'm a direct guy from way back when. Everything we suggest doing is tagged and tracked, because insight comes from everywhere, not the least of which, as soon as we start to do something, insight starts exploding everywhere, at the touch point, in the content, inside the channel, inside the store, inside the living room, inside people's pockets, inside people's fingers. So that's where we have to, it's the business case for a different kind of marketing using different insights. Because we showed them, as part of that workshop, a set of tools that were based upon new insights about their patient, and they were shocked, and they bought.
So, I mean, it's this advocacy for an always-on, multifaceted, insights generating area. You know, I don't know whether it's department, people, program's a better word for it, because it's you're always looking, you're always moving to improve, even when something's out there. How's this working? I mean, we have traditionally, you know, you have, say, take advertising and you do your ad tests. That was how I started out in the commercial world. I did ad testing and was always, you know, very skeptical of the creatives because they was like, you researchers, you don't know what you're talking about. You know, there's tensions that go on, okay?
I know that pain.
Yeah, but you know, and then it'll be like, okay, so we might do the ad tracking, like how's, you know, what are we getting to the moment of saturation? But whilst there's an and, I think that's incredibly important. I mean, I would say in today's world right now, you're putting messaging out, you might want to test it, like, you know, go find out how people are, you know, what's working, what's not working. Today is the world of missteps that would be so easy to make unintentionally. So I would definitely say that. And of course, you might want to monitor how it's performing. At the same time, there's so many other tools that you've talked about. Like there's so many other ways that we can listen through social channels. We can do ethnographies and get, you know, mobile ethnographies, you know, people that's self-directed by the people and get into their lives. So it feels like it is much more about a program in place that's continuous, it's ongoing, and it's just a, you know, an integrated function.
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth and my plan, because the last part of our workshop was introducing them to an entire a circular marketing model that was not linear or cyclical, that was always on, and it had some sort of strategic insights function, some sort of creative content production function, some sort of channel and distribution and media function, some sort of analytical function. And these functions, these disciplines, whether it was one person or 1,000 people, never stopped working together around the human insight, and never stopped throwing off fresh or validated or invalidated or new insights or deeper insights in that activity. So you're exactly right. And that's a marketing that most brands don't do. And you know, to me, but it has to go all the way down into the business. It has to go down into the store. One of my favorite recent cases of this kind of different kind of behavior for businesses in market that gets a different kind of value that makes it very difficult to compete against is Patagonia. And they did something, I think, a summer ago with during the ascendancy of the global warming. You know, remember global warming? Remember? It's amazing. I was thinking, wow, that was, I'd take that problem back right now if that was all we had. But they had they empowered their people who ran their London office on one of the Fridays in the summer to go to the protest, and they put a handwritten sign on the front of the Patagonia in central London, and you know, as you might imagine, the rent and the clientele that you get there, and it said, "We're at the protest back at 3. Join us there or see you here." And you know, game over. Game over. Try. If you're North Face, how do you compete against that?
I mean, I'm just going to say that Patagonia is just beautiful in terms of its brand and its authenticity to its message, its purpose, and how that every single time they just seem to get it all the time and hitting it spot on who we are and how we're going to behave. But I think that's because of their authenticity. You know, that's just true to who they are as the people within that brand and organization.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is its purpose is extraordinarily practical, because its purpose is around its product usage. Its purpose is a world explored. Yeah. And it's got the tools and the clothing and the attitude to help people do that. And they get a premium for those products and for those experiences, because their insight about those people is a world explored, is a world shared, is a world experienced like no one else can. And so Patagonia has become this, and so their purpose, so this is why it's difficult. If you're Coca-Cola, what's your purpose? You know, and that's why with LVMH right now, like last week, everybody on this call saw what they decided to do with their production line, because they, by the way, make a product like perfume or cologne or scent that's 99% alcohol. Let's make hand sanitizer at scale and give it away. And so that is purpose tied to product in a way that you have to, but only that gives you authenticity. It can't be made up. It can't be imagined. It cannot be faked. It has to be embedded in the DNA of the business and the product. Yeah.
I mean, and that's the whole, the word authentic and authenticity is exactly as it is. You can't fake it. So, you know, so we've got a few more minutes. I want to see if we can get to any of the questions. Hopefully we answered that one around gathering insights around culture that are actionable for business. I think that is different approaches that you can take, and then also how you apply that for businesses. Somebody is interested in you extrapolating on mentioning, she thinks you mentioned Marxist branding. Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
What kind of branding?
Marxist.
Oh, yes. I tell my students, I say, look, because my personal politics, my journey of political action, thought, and purpose is never quite ends. And it started out as a young radical in the 70s, and it continues to this day. In the middle, I got very, very kind of modestly normal as I raised 5 kids and started businesses and ran around the world, shilling as an advertising strategist. But more and more and more, I go back to texts. I go back to Marx. I go back to Ricardo. I go back to Nietzsche. I go back to more and more and more to Deleuze, and I inform my understanding of people through these. And and Marx was a sociologist. He was an essential, anthropologist in that service, because he understood how markets work, how people inside markets work, and he understood how desire works. And so to me, it's all insight is about desire. And so I tell my students the first week, I said, for the next 14 nights, we're all raving capitalists in this room. But I'll still tell you, read your Marx. Because there's truth, and not the truth. I never use that word truth. Don't use that word truth. Truth is relative. It's totally subjective, right? But there is validity and there's actionability in much of what he understood about how value is created, how it's exchanged, and how it grows.
Yeah, and I think that's a great message, in just in general of, we tend to, and this is certainly what we've become as a society, we read things that we feel that is particularly along the lane, in our lane. Like, I subscribe to that, or this is the type of thing I'm interested in. And yet when we do read, I've joined a book club and I'm reading things that I would never look to read. And it's great because I might not like it, but it's given me different thoughts. The book that there's one that I'm just really struggling with.
Which is it?
Oh, it's a fiction book. It's a crime. It's not, and I'm like, but this is good. I mean, and this goes for anything that we do, whether it is fiction, nonfiction. It opens up our minds when we read things that isn't in the lane that we're typically staying in. So I think that's an important kind of point, full stop. Read widely. And that actually, there's a comment that somebody's put, like, how you're spot on, and you need a key insight to create a product or service that's valued by the consumer. Read, and gather. Knowledge mapping. I'm inspired.
Oh, completely. Applause to that comment, and applause to your point about fiction as well. Completely. A lot of my courses, I don't give a text because there aren't so many that keep up. And a couple of my courses, digital marketing is one. At the beginning, I say, I bet you were very, very happy that there's no assigned text, very expensive text, right? And I said, well, I lied. And I start to write on the board, Anna Karenina, the Brothers Grimm, recognitions, Ulysses, and they're horrified. And I go down, and it's half what's on my bedstand, half what's on my Kindle, and half what I just thought of that day at the Strand. And I say, okay, listen, I'm serious. Everybody in this room, pick one of those books and read it. And if you're from China, pick one of your own classics. And if you're from Russia, pick one of the, because to me, that is where the nature of humans' need and desire and want is hiding.
No, that's great. That's great. So another kind of comment that it's time to listen to what people do. What they do creates mutual value in relationships, reaction. And this person would love to connect with us, and we'll share out the context, but thank you for that. I do think listening to what people do.
Yeah, again, it has to do with how brands behave in market. And so that listen to what people do is a very interesting gloss or almost a thought puzzle, because there's this great tension inside of research where, are we looking for behavioral insights? Are we looking for emotional insights, or something in between? So listening to what people do is interesting, because if you ask people what they do, you get one answer.
Oh yeah.
If you watch what people do, you get a different answer. And if you listen to what people say when they're doing that, you get an even deeper answer sometimes. So yes, I think there's an insight hiding inside your commenter's suggestion.
And that definitely goes back to the triangulation of how we're getting the information and going, you know, you might do some exploratory work. That's kind of the typical qual, quant, qual. If we were going to put in those original kind of frameworks of, okay, let's go out and try and understand what kind of language are people using? How are they thinking about something? Okay, then let's go put that in a survey to quantify it. You know, is this just, you know, a small subsegment, or is this to the broader population? And then let's go back and understand there. I mean, but again, I think that we don't live in the ideal world, and so, in terms of, again, better, faster, cheaper budgets. And I'm just going to go back to, because I do think that this is incredibly relevant for our audience. It's something that's a passionate, you know, point for me, and it may well be for you, Thom. But, you know, okay, so how can we tackle getting insights valued in companies? It's, you know, I know you talked about demonstrating the growth in business, but sometimes you just don't even get that. You don't get that opportunity, that conversation.
Yeah, and it's extremely hard, because what I'm suggesting is something that most of us haven't really even seen before, and we've seen it in little pockets. We've seen it. We saw it when, you know, Patagonia gave their store manager permission to close the store and go down to the protest. But it's rare, and it's hard to engineer into the fabric of an operation, of a business, especially if you're a public company. So to answer that is very difficult. I think that, you know, you used the word there, growth. Now, when you wrote this brief for this call 2.5 weeks ago, growth was something that, you know, every single person on this call, I'm sure, is on a team or works for a team who every quarter, and certainly every year, gets new numbers. All right, we're on the hook for 10% growth, or in these markets. We're on the hook for, you know, 70% acceleration or velocity increase in these markets for this product set. And we're on the hook. It's always about growth, right? Because that is how we think business is. It creates value. And so growth in June and July and August and by Christmas in this world, whatever this world does look like by the end of this year, growth is going to be, growth is almost going to be completely an intangible idea. What's real is value. And so I think that, and so when people talk about growth, I teach Sun Tzu, the great Chinese military strategist, and he says, you know, he says some wonderful things, but his is about an ethical way of approaching war of all things, and it has got almost nothing to do with thinking about the competition. It has almost everything to do without thinking about value, to thinking about, you know, territory, to thinking about humans and tribe and whatever. And so that ethical fabric has to inform whatever we do next. And so I think that if you get deeper, fresher insight than the competitors have, you make it extraordinarily difficult to compete against. That's what growth is. Growth is for the people who work there to put a sign on the door and go to the protest. Growth is for people who go there. So let's change all the way we produce, you know, perfume and turn it into hand sanitizer. Growth is, I don't think the objective. I think every strategy based upon achieving growth misses the point of what value creation can and might be about for the people that we need to get and keep as customers.
Yeah, that's, I cannot agree more. I think that if we deliver value and we're reframing, I guess it's just reframing how we're thinking about it.
That's it.
We have time for one final question. There is a comment just around, rather than reading business books, read great literature, and person agreeing entirely with that. I think it is worth just saying, you know, sometimes we don't have to just sit with the business books, that again, insights and inspiration and just our knowledge gets expanded in so many different ways. But the final question that I think we've got time for is, and I think it's a good one, it's kind of going back to the beginning of the stages, is do you offer insights at the proposal stage?
It's a very good question. Because if we give it away, then aren't I undervaluing insight? And again, I'm a strategy guy, and everybody in the Zoom cast knows that in the agency world, the strategy guy is also the pitch man. And the only time people really pay attention to what the strategy people think and do is during the pitch. So I spent my entire career pitching and then planning once we win the business, but you know, then you have to squeeze your way onto the scope, don't you? And so to that point, you're almost always giving away an insight. But if you get good enough at it, it's worth it, because I have found in my career, as I get a little bit better at it each year, people buy more each year. And then you get paid.
Which is a good thing. Thom, thank you so much. I think this has been a really interesting discussion. Thank you everybody for joining on the line today. I appreciate your interaction and your questions with us. I hope you found it informative. Rachel, over to you to wrap us up.
Thank you.
Great,
Thank you, Zoe.
Great. Thanks, Zoe. And Thom, thanks so much for joining us today. That was one of my most favorite webinars that I've ever participated in.
My pleasure. I gush.
Thank you. Unfortunately, it looks like we've reached the end of our time together. If there were any questions that didn't get answered, don't worry. We will follow up soon. Or you can email us at webinars@focusvision.com and we will respond to your question at that time. We hope you enjoyed today's panel discussion, our conversation with Thom Kennon, and we hope to see you at future webinars. Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.